Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how the calls are growing from inside the government to push even further for closer trade ties to the EU, with Rachel Reeves now arguing for the government to push harder on breaking down trade barriers with our continental neighbours. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So Trump is to trade what Putin is to defence in some ways, isn't he? Putin, who naturally doesn't like NATO, given that it literally was brought into existence to guard against first Soviet and then Russian expansion into Europe. Yet Putin's actions in 2022 have led to a literal doubling of the Russian western border with NATO. Well, Trump is attempting something similar with trade and may well yield the same results. The US president is aiming to increase domination in manufacturing with bullying and extortion. Yet because he has overplayed his hand, the result could well be much weaker trade for America. I mean, who bets the farm on a pair of twos and a pair of threes? Look at it from the point of view of those of us in Europe. The same principles do apply to literally every other country in the world. But in Europe, we're looking at a long-term future of at least 10% on almost all of our exports to America. And if that's come, if we come to some arrangement, that is what that is, because otherwise Trump puts the tariffs on the EU back up to 20%, and who knows with the UK. Our government has already given up hope of reducing the tariffs with a trade deal. They've basically said, yeah, even if we get a trade deal, Trump doesn't seem interested in lowering these tariffs, right? The trade deal is now purely for its own sake, and maybe to avoid those tariffs going higher, who knows. Trump is giving the strongest possible impression that he wants tariffs on all imports as high as he can get away with. 10% tariffs, you'd think to yourself, well, some people are thinking, well, if he leaves the 10% tariffs in, then that wouldn't be too bad for countries around the world. It's like, yeah, but that also won't bring in much money. He needs a lot more money than that, right? A few weeks ago, Starmer was expressing the hope that it might be possible to negotiate with the US and avoid all extra tariffs. No confidence anymore in that. In fact, the government have shifted very much to an emphasis on lower trade barriers with other markets, including the EU, rather than negotiating with America. We are still negotiating with them, of course, but there is no longer the same confidence we can do a deal. Starmer hasn't even spoken to Trump since he launched his tariff trade war, he's now saying. So there's no confidence we can do anything to eliminate these tariffs. Now, when journalists ask the government global trade questions now, they used to respond with, trade deal with the US. Now it's like, trade deal with India and lower trade barriers with the EU. And Rachel Reeves is the latest senior member of the government, reported to be urging Starmer to be much more ambitious in lowering those trade barriers, specifically by aligning standards with the EU on everything that impacts our trade. Now, this is in line with Labour's election promises, as well as the legislation they're currently passing. It's nothing controversial, it's nothing new. But there is a sense in which Reeves and others want the government now to push harder and faster. Faster, I think, is the key. In the normal course of events, so there's a summit next month between the UK and the EU, which is going to focus on defence and security agreements. This is now more important because those agreements will potentially be worth much more economically since Trump announced his intention to withdraw military support from Europe. Indeed, although it was originally intended just as a way of working more closely with Europe, it could now form a major part of our economic strategy. And in an interview with the Financial Times, Reeves was saying that she now sees this summit as a way to get on the front foot with Trump's global trade war. Before, you'd have thought the talks on trade itself would really not get going until 2026, with the review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Reeves wants to kick things off much sooner, and she won't be alone. She explicitly said, and I quote, "Since Brexit, it has been harder for British firms to export around Europe, particularly smaller firms. Many feel shut out of European markets." So worth pointing out to those frustrated by Labour's reticence on issues such as customs union, this is a fundamentally different government where the EU is concerned. Their reluctance on some issues is entirely political. Key voters are wary of reopening those Brexit arguments again. Yet, although they're not shouting it from the rooftops, they are saying, Brexit is damaging trade and that the solution is not more trade with fantasy markets around the world, although they obviously do want to lower trade barriers with markets around the world. But they are clear. The number one way to deal with the damage Brexit causes is to reverse some of those Brexit measures within those red lines for now. It's why I'll repeat what should be obvious, really. If you want to reverse Brexit, absolutely hassle politicians in the government. Why not? That's what they're there for. But don't be thinking that the barrier is a government led by the biggest Remainers in the country. The barrier is voters. Talk to them. Stop pretending people already want a reversal. If you're going, everyone I know wants this, then everyone you know is too closed a loop. They clearly do not. Make them want it. Make people want it. Watch just how quickly politicians follow that. In fact, we've seen the government flip on policies very quickly to bad policies just because of the public mood. The idea that a Remainer government would want to stick with Brexit against public perceptions when it has flipped to questionable policies because of public pressure, like the Sentencing Council row, for example, that is mind-boggling. That is not occurring. Labour are not swimming against a tide of anti-Brexit sentiment. Doesn't exist. Needs to. According to this report, Reeves has been pushing for Starmer to just align regulations on industries such as chemicals. In fact, there was a bit of a hint that the government are in agreement that they need to prioritise action on EU trade more urgently. So the summit on May 19th, which is always going to be exciting enough as it's the first such event since we left the EU, but maybe it has added importance as both the UK and the EU need to diversify markets. It's not just that the UK needs it, the EU as well. The Macron is talking about the fact, the EU, okay, their tariffs are now at 10% and they could probably live with that. They're not happy about the 25%, just like we're not on like cars, particularly Germany. But it's chaotic. They could go up at any time. They don't even know they've got 90 days. The bottom line is Trump is not going to agree anything, which takes trade with America back to where it was. So mathematically, it's really simple. You either accept lower trade and a weaker economy, or you work to replace that trade with others. We're not going to boost it with America. Trump does not want that from any country. And everyone who decides to do the latter is going to have to be flexible. The UK, the EU, Canada, anyone else who wants to join in. But as the EU is obviously the massive market around which this idea will have to revolve, they need to take some leadership role. So far, they've had the position of, okay, if the UK and Canada want to talk to us, we'll see what they offer. We'll just react to that. They need to actually be a bit more proactive, because the bottom line is this. There are three huge markets in the world. There's the EU, there's America, and there's China, right? Now, America wants to dominate even more. A lot of countries don't want that, right? Because every other country in the world is a loser when that happens. So what are your alternatives? What are your alternatives? Does China win out of this, or does the EU? So we need to make it the EU. Unions are even calling for stronger trade with the EU. They've changed their bloody tune, haven't they? Better late than never. It's just in everyone's interest. Like Starmer was saying recently, how no groups, like business groups and various other groups, no group wants, because people are talking about escalating, right? Is saying no one wants us to escalate with the US and trigger a trade war, right? No group that is an important part of the economy. Absolutely true. Unions don't want it. Business groups don't want it. No one wants it. But also, every group is also calling for lower trade barriers with the EU. Gordon Brown's pushing for much closer trade with the EU. He's been calling for something which goes beyond just taking down Brexit trade barriers. Just as he did during the banking crisis, he is urging sensible world leaders, coordinate action, work with each other, protect poorer countries as well as your own. He made the point that 96% of people and 85% of manufactured goods are outside the USA. The scope for international cooperation, working together against Trump here, is immense. But it takes a willingness to work together. And Brown's not just some random voice. I'm not just saying this because he's lived through it. Starmer listens to him. He chose Brown, for example, to work on his plans to replace the House of Lords. That's one of his key personal projects. And in a situation like this, you would think he'd be listening more carefully. See, despite losing the following election, Gordon Brown, along with his Chancellor at the time, the late Alistair Darling, did manage economic policy really very well, won a lot of plaudits around the world. He genuinely brought countries together. He took concerted action. It's just a shame not enough people back home appreciated what he did. But I would like to see a much stronger push at the summit next month for talks to begin in earnest before the scheduled TCA review. Like face the times as they are now. There's an urgency. I have little doubt about the direction we're headed in, just the speed at which we're travelling. Ordinarily, waiting another year might not be too bad, but Trump could literally crash the global economy next week. This 90-day pause on some of the tariffs, okay, it's a stay of execution if it holds. But we're still locked into the guillotine, aren't we? A tipping point in the global economy could be reached this month, next month, maybe not till summer. Maybe Trump backs down from the really crazy stuff permanently. Maybe he doesn't. We don't know. I actually think Trump has still got more crazy left in the tank. He's a creature of chaos. It's actually a tactic of his. Do mad shit and then try to look for the opportunities and the destruction. We need to move as quickly as possible to protect ourselves before this happens. Waiting another year, it's not doomed to failure, but I think it is playing with fire. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.